how concerned should we be about this news of a nuclear test possibly, and what could that mean in terms of an escalation there?
Well, I think it's quite likely that there will be at some point in the not-too-distant future another nuclear test by the North Koreans. I'm not sure exactly when that will occur, and I don't know if it's going to happen quickly or not. But in any case, they're well along on this path of theirs to the development of nuclear weapons. And testing is an important feature of that program. So I expect there will be another test at some point in the relatively near future.
You know, we're really used to this cycle that we hear all the time. So they have the test, there is the very predictable condemnation, then we go into a period of hibernation, no one hears about it. What is a game changer in all this? I mean, do you see a tipping point coming with North Korea?
Well, not in the foreseeable future. At some point, as their missile program continues to develop and their nuclear weapons program continues, they will reach a point where I think we will all conclude they are a very grave threat to regional stability and indeed to nuclear non-proliferation.
Including a nuclear test to protect its sovereignty and dignity. The threat comes just 2 days after the South said that North Korea was making final preparations to conduct its fourth nuclear test. Seoul has warned that Pyongyang would face serious consequences if it conducts a nuclear test. Tensions between the two Koreas have been running high in recent months following Pyongyang's missile tests in March.
With the last of the great dictators, lines of young pioneers on parade, a distant glimpse of a remote Politburo, and goose-stepping soldiers. North Korea is so 20th century, and yet with nuclear weapons and at war with the South, a very real threat to the 21st. It was a rare opportunity to visit the most secretive country on earth. But with everything stage managed, would it be possible to find out what is really going on inside the Democratic People's Republic of Korea? Invited for the celebrations of the great leader's birthday, the founder of the country, Kim Il-sung, who, though dead, is still president. The birthday is marked by a public holiday and floral offerings, confusing to the outsider, even in this country of the bizarre.
Today is his birthday.
I realize that. And so you're giving him flowers?
Yeah, it's the whole hearts of the people.
But I believe he's dead. Does this mean that you think he is a god, that he is immortal?
Yes, he is the immortal person, eternal father of our Korean people. We don't think that he passed away.
And so the great leader is president for life and the afterlife, while his son, Kim Jong-il, the dear leader, is head of the ruling Korean Workers' Party and in charge of running things in this life. He recently announced that he has a son in waiting and that the hereditary communist dictatorship is set to continue. But how do people live outside this city of the elite? The great leader ruled that the army should always come first, and it was fitting that we drove first to the most fortified border in the world, with our minders forever at our sides, down an empty 6-lane motorway. One thing we might all envy here, the lack of private cars means no traffic jams. No peace treaty was ever agreed at the end of the Civil War in 1953, and North and South Korea are still technically at war. with 1 million troops from either side based along the demilitarized zone, with 30,000 Americans in between. I expected to find more tension here after the North was accused recently of sinking a South Korean naval ship, but it all looked very quiet.
It's Sunday, and we all take a rest on Sunday.
A good day to invade.
그러나 미국은 전쟁을 일으키면서
When the Americans started the war, when they invaded us in 1950, it was also a Sunday. They thought they'd sweep through the country in one day, but during the 3-year war they got a good beating. And if they try and invade again, we'll give them an even greater beating than they got in the 1950s.
아마 50년대보다 그러나 변하지 않은 것은 아직까지도 미국이 우리 공화국에 대한 적대적 정책입니다.
At the military museum here, George Orwell would recognize the rewriting of history by the Ministry of Truth.
그러니까 내가 말하면 그저 따라가면서 이거만 넣어지고
In fact, it was North Korean troops who crossed the line in 1950 and thereby triggered a bloody war. But then Orwell also understood the need for a government to keep a people in constant fear of an enemy, to better endure hardship at home. With a population of 23 million, North Korea has a standing army of more than 1 million. 1 in 20 are in uniform. In a country desperately short of food, the army gets priority. A third of people here suffer from stunted growth. After the famine of the 1990s, they had to abandon the 5 foot 3 inches minimum height required for a soldier. I asked to visit a farm to look at how the country feeds itself, and at breakneck speed we drove past towns and villages in various stages of dilapidation. I didn't see a single tractor in the hour it took to get here to the cooperative farm which our minders had chosen.
On the way here, we saw a lot of other villages which didn't look quite so tidy and neat and orderly and indeed wealthy. Can we visit them? Is that possible? No?
No, this was a regular village, I was told, and to prove it, we'd visit a regular home.
Wonderful. And the gentleman's medals? You wear them every day?
It was explained that the medals and the feast were because the head of the household was 60 today and retiring. Clearly some confusion here.
만으로 59살.
I am 59, I still work on the farm, and I normally eat noodles for lunch, he announced, before returning to the script.
궁지는 위대한 장군님의 배려로
Thanks to the kindness of the great leader, he built civilized housing for all of us, and then made this a mechanized model farm, and we are proud of all these things.
There was not much sign of mechanization at the model farm, though a lot of effort was going into painting political slogans. When a tractor eventually drove into sight, the chief man here, Mr. Joe, appeared to be trying to hide something from the camera. He told the tractor bearing the European Union logo to drive away. After all, the country claims to be self-sufficient in everything, even food.
Mr. Joe, even your tractor, I saw, was donated by the European Union, so the country is not surviving without aid.
As was to happen time and time again, my minder refused to translate.
Shall I say that again? Do you not understand the question?
I can understand, but it's going to...
I'm sure Mr. Joe knows all this. It's not a surprise to him.
In the end, they negotiated an acceptable response.
다른 지역들에서도 그에 대해서도 좀 얘기해 줄 수 있는데, 그러니까 다른 농장이라든가 다른 지역들에서도 뭐 이러한 어려움들이 없겠는가?
아니 우리나라가 일시 그저 고난 행군식이 일시.
We had problems for a short time, but with our own industry and output, we can produce enough crops on our own without any support from outside.
The problem he refers to was the famine of the 1990s. Pictures smuggled out of the north at the time show the horror of the disaster, which aid agencies claim killed up to 2 million people. Over 10 years on, the World Food Programme is still feeding people here, because the country can't produce enough food and the daily government rations are not enough. From our van we could see shop fronts and stalls and long queues. Were these the government ration distribution points, or were they the private markets which people who have money depend on to survive? Again, we weren't allowed to stop. I was getting desperate.
Mr. John, we've only got one day left here. Please, can we go to the market?
Yes, but you can have a look around, but you can't make any claims.
I could go to the market, but not with a camera.
The market was bustling with activity, and the counters loaded with local produce, vegetables and meat, and from China, electrical goods, fans, cooking utensils, clothes, shoes, bags, the lot. But it's private enterprise, and the government doesn't like it.
앞으로 사회주의가 완전히 승리하게 되면은
In the future, when socialism is completely victorious, these markets will disappear. For now, we will make no effort to encourage them or increase their number, and ultimately they must disappear.
I asked to meet English-speaking students and was taken to Pyongyang University and introduced to North Korea's internal intranet.
How do you access the World Wide Web? What internet providers, what search engines do you use?
I can't directly.
Ordinary people here are forbidden access to the internet. The dear leader has arranged for all that they need to know to be put on a closed system.
You know what a hand grenade is, don't you?
Yes, I know.
The hand grenade was just going to blow up, but...
The spoken English among university students is very good. How do they do it?
Thanks to the great leader Marshal Kim Jong-il, we can see British films and even American films, even though the America is our enemy. For example, The Sound of Music.
You mentioned your great leader,
Yes.
and we have heard a lot about him while we have been here in Korea. What other world leaders do you admire?
I also know many other leaders, such as Stalin and Mao Zedong in China.
Stalin, Mao, you can be forgiven for asking what century they think they're living in. I came across graduates who hadn't heard of Nelson Mandela, let alone Google. But then, if you're not told, how would you know? At school, children are taught to sing a song that tells them that they have nothing to envy in the outside world and that they are the happiest people on earth. A kindergarten with its own indoor fairground. For more than a week in North Korea, they invited us to indulge in the fantasy. I think what surprised me most here was that they could believe that we would believe that what they showed us was for real. But what's happening in the rest of the country? I had to go to South Korea to find out. Just over 100 miles south of Pyongyang, the South Korean capital, Seoul, couldn't provide a more dramatic contrast. While the North remains mired in the beliefs and limitations of the last century, South Koreans rejoice in the inventions and the gizmos of today.
If I find this country baffling, imagine what it must be like for some 3,000 North Koreans who arrive here every year from the most isolated, uninformed and unconnected country in the world.
Maybe Garam, who fled from the north, was always a South Korean at heart.
Hey, look at this, a cake shop. Should we go in here?
She was arrested for listening to tapes of South Korean music at home and managed to escape before being transported to a labor camp. She arrived a year ago and still can't believe it.
There is so much to eat. You can eat when you like, but in North Korea you can't find food you'd want. We only eat meat twice a year on special days, like Kim Il-sung's birthday. We were told that people in the south were so hungry and they rummaged through rubbish bins and carried old tins with them to collect food in.
She took emergency measures in case she didn't make it.
If we were caught by the police, then we would have been sent back to North Korea, which is like a death sentence for us. There'd be no point in going back to live like an animal. That's why we travelled with poison, so that if we were caught, we'd take it and kill ourselves.
We met with another group of recent arrivals. We showed them a bit of what we'd seen in the north, like the kindergarten with its indoor fairground.
Thank you.
And how we were invited into a typical house.
No, we didn't have that much food. I noticed bananas. I never saw bananas in the north. That table was prepared in advance because you were coming. It's all lies.
The kindergarten kids, they don't appear to have any health problems, and no ordinary kindergarten looks like that. To the north of Pyongyang, things are very different. There's no room to play inside, only outside. And the children are very thin and malnourished. There are hundreds of street children, homeless children, just living and dying on the streets.
And what about the worship of the great leader?
From the youngest age, from nursery school, all your life until you die, you're brainwashed. I thought he was God, and that Kim Jong-il was the son of God. Now I think completely differently. What do they mean by saying he's a god? He's just a normal person.
Many North Koreans have been living here for years. Men like Ha To-kung feel a responsibility to those left behind.
암시장에서 거래되고 있는 달러를 회수하기 위한 목적이 있었다는 것이죠.
They send radio broadcasts with news of the outside world, which can be picked up only on the perimeters of the country, but at risk.
정례 검토에 대해 발표했습니다.
Those detected by the so-called Electrical Wave Inspection Bureau are sent to rehabilitation centers, forced labor camps, like this one filmed secretly in the north.
So they are detained in this labor training camp, and they wake up early in the morning. They're brought out of the prison and forced to walk on the street or on this roof.
Those charged with more serious political crimes get sent to a gulag.
According to gulag survivors, in Korea we have tens of gulag survivors, about 200,000 people only in the gulags. And other than gulags, there are labor training camp, rehabilitation centers, including all those prisons. I see about 1 million people are detained in the prisons.
That's almost 1 in 20 of the population are being detained.
About 5 to 10% of the whole populations.
Diplomats and human rights organizations concur, claiming that many hundreds of thousands are detained. Mr. Ha gets news from the north by calling contacts living on the border with China, from where they can pick up a mobile phone signal. We've disguised this man's voice to protect his identity.
여보세요?
아나운서도 있고, 딴 중국에도 원래 한 10시간씩 보는 데도 있고,
공장도 안 들어가는데 뭐 어떻게 골고루 다 만들어서 그 있는 가지고 써요. 말도 안 되지. 여기는 물에 아무리 깨끗한 물이라 그래도 한 리터에 9마리 있어요. 9마리 대장비에. 지금 없습니다. 없는데 이 정도로 쌀값이 많이 떨어졌으니까.
In North Korea, food is treated like a state secret. People get government rations, but they're not enough. They depend on private markets to survive. But we were told the government plans to shut them down. What do the young people think will be the future? Why aren't people rebelling?
그걸 한다는 자체는 자기만 죽는 게 아니라
If you rebel, it would not only result in your death, but your family will be punished. Because the risk is so great, not many people try.
선뜻 그 일을 하기를 싫어하죠.
This young man should know he escaped here after his father, an army officer, attempted a coup and was executed. He says that the rest of his family was sent to a gulag.
But society there should be changed. It should collapse so that everyone there can be rescued.
People are listening more to what is happening in South Korea and China and in the outside world. Illegally on the radio, in their own homes, and so their understanding is changing gradually. So I wonder if that is the way that things are going to change.
But back in North Korea, only those who live in the border areas have any link to the outside world. In the rest of the country, there is no contact. There's no civil society, no churches or trade unions of the type which brought down the communist regimes of Eastern Europe. In the capital, Pyongyang, they celebrate the great leader's birthday. An extravagance of fireworks entertains the chosen few. Only those with an untarnished political background can live in the capital city, and they all know who to thank for the spectacle.
Our great father, he founded our country and he brings us happiness.
Elsewhere in the country, if people are lucky, as those who've escaped told us, they may get a rare ration of meat to celebrate the birthday, but without electricity, they'll eat in darkness. But living next door to South Korea, one of the most communications-aware countries in the world, how much longer will it be possible to keep these people in the dark?